You know what's unfair? The players get to make as many PCs as they want and no one bats an eyelash. Libraries of characters with untold stories. Yet a GM shows off their bespoke list of monsters they want to use against the party, and it's all, it can do what through the floor? What do you mean it has a breath weapon? And nothing that big should have a climb speed. Frankly, I feel it's unfair. It's time we GMs united. Hi everyone, the voice you're hearing is mine. I'm Obscura, the lovely visage you see before you is my Eldritch buddy Wheaton. We're in a shared body situation, but you don't have to worry about that because today we're going to be talking the fundamentals of creating your own bespoke creatures for Pathfinder 2nd edition. We're going to be pairing this up with one of my previous videos where we talked about making minions magnificent. With that in mind, we're not going to be making immensely complex creatures, just basic peeps to throw against your players. Though, in the future, I do want to look into more advanced creatures. Today, we're going to dive headfirst into making our own creatures, starting by talking about roles, about different approaches depending on the type of creature, whether two-legged, four, or far more, and then building a creature. All that said, let's begin! Okay, so roles. The GM core on page 115 provides a pretty good roadmap for most NPCs you want to cover, but really doesn't talk much about the role each of them holds. Now, some of these might be considered self-explanatory, but also there are some things that aren't as obvious. Like, a brute seems obvious, but is that a tank or a damage dealer? Also, how does that overlap with soldier? Same with sniper and skirmisher, different roadmaps but very similar, so how do they overlap? So in some respects, it's better to think about what the purpose of the creature is. What do you want them to do? Having a good idea of what their purpose is, or the objective they have, will help guide you on how to build them. Now, this can be fairly simple. If their objective is to jump into melee and do damage, or to sit back at range and do damage, part of this will depend on who they're paired up with. For instance, building off the video I did on underlings, who you're supporting will play into this. For example, it might seem obvious to pair a melee boss up with ranged damage dealers, but how often is the boss going to get in the way if they're large, for instance? In some cases, it might be better to pair them up with creatures that will be melee with them, but focus on maneuvers instead, and therefore skills, to make things easier for the big bad. From a similar angle, having casters as well can mean a lot of different roles, so carefully considering how you want them used in a combat will be important and will dictate spell choices. When it comes to more monstrous creatures, things can get a little more out there, but not in a bad way, and honestly, there'll be a lot of crossovers with earlier considerations. However, the role they have to play might be different and even more esoteric. Understanding what you want them to do will help you make further choices down the way. For instance, if they're designed as a mount, speed is a priority, and potentially high AC, whether through agility or armor. Whereas a force of nature, for example a dragon, would have area abilities designed for mass devastation, or spells that do similar for crowd control and dealing with multiple targets. Okay, so we've considered the role for our creature, so how do we go about actually building them? Thankfully, the GM core provides a lot of information on how to do this in their section on building creatures. I do encourage you to read through the section after watching this or beforehand because it does go into a lot more depth than I do here. And even if you don't have access to the GM core, I do suggest looking it up on the archives in Nephis where it is all available on there for free. That said, because we are doing fundamentals, we're going to start by creating a bandit. Nice and simple. Now, I know a stat block for them already exists, but once again, we're learning how to do this, so building a pretty easy concept from scratch can really help with practice for more complex and weirder things. When we consider our standard fantasy bandit, we imagine someone who can do both melee and range, but at the same point is pretty good at ambushing. This combination makes them a pretty good candidate for a middle-of-the-road creature. Nothing too big, nothing too small, maybe just an ability or two. Further, for the sake of this, we're just going to make a level 1 bandit. Let's go through this step by step, starting with attributes. Now, there is a bit of a back and forth in design circles about how much of a point there is to giving attribute modifiers to creatures. Most of their other stats are disconnected from attributes, so they don't make much sense. It is still a good idea to have them though, as it makes for a good guide point, and it does come up with untrained skill rolls. First, we go to the chart attribute modifier scale in the GM core. Because our bandit is intended as an underling, none of their attributes are going above moderate, so it's either going to be moderate or low. For the purposes of this, we're going to split it down the middle. Moderate +3 for strength, dexterity, and charisma, and then +1 for constitution, intelligence, and wisdom. Now for perception, well, our bandit needs to keep a lookout and generally be suspicious, so we're going to either moderate or high. I'm going to go with high as it does make sense for them. Moving on to skills, once again we're going to be sticking to most of the middle of the road moderate, so the skills are going to be around +6 because there isn't much difference between moderate and high, and these are underlings. I'm not too concerned with the difference. As for skills, my purpose for them is bandits and more to the point combat minions, so I'm only going to pick skills that make sense. Acrobatics, athletics, deception, intimidation, thievery, and stealth. And we're going to set them all to +6. Now, the other reason I've set them all to +6 across the board is to simplify them. If I'm using this at a physical table, I'll know that they have a +6 across the board for all skill checks, and I won't have to continuously check. Safe items we're ignoring for now, but it is something to be aware of as you make higher level creatures, and something I'll perhaps cover in a future video. As for armor class, now this is always a weird one because armor class on underlings can ebb and flow. Our bandits are intended to be able to stand a couple of rounds in combat. So once again, we're going to stick to moderate and go with an AC of 15. Moving on to saving throws, once again this can be a little weird as saving throws are highly subject to opinion, but this is why it's a good idea to know the concept for your creature. Although our bandits are designed to be all-rounders, as a personal thing, I like to have saving throws have some pretty clear differences, so we're going to be using moderate, low, and terrible columns. I want our rogues to be pretty agile and roguish, so we're going to be setting the reflex save to +7. Though also pretty rugged, so +4 for their fortitude save, and then a terrible will save at +2. The reason I'm keeping these saves as separate as possible, however, is for when players do their recall knowledge skills or stuff that allows them to see what saves are better. I want it to be actually meaningful for the players to actually be involved in that meta side of the game. Moving on from defenses, we get to our hit points. Now, our bandits are staying middle of the road here. They need to be switch hitters, able to stand a couple of hits, so you guessed it, we're going moderate again. Also, because I like whole numbers, we're going between the high and the low of it, so 20 hit points. Just to make a couple of notes here, if you're building someone who isn't supposed to be hit too much, then you go low for the hit points. So when do you go high? I tend to feel like high amount of hit points should be reserved for big bads, or at least creatures that are supposed to stand in close combat by themselves, even if they do have range backup. Now, the next section here is resistances and weaknesses. Now, I touched on some of this in my materials video, but for the most part, you don't really have to worry about it for underlings. However, if you do want to do it, because there are some cases where it's applicable like undead, go for minimum. Big bads get the maximum. If they are going to have a significant resistance, make sure you either drop their hit points down a category or add a weakness to make up for it. For a bandit, however, we're not really worried about it, so we can ignore this table entirely. Like the advice given in Speed and GM Core, we're going to stick to the suggested 25 feet. Though, once again, just quickly, if they're meant to be fast, increase the speed. 40 feet is good for 4-legged mounts, for instance, though a 4-legged attacker, you're safe to have something in between. Regarding strikes, this is where things can get a bit more complicated. As this is something of a fundamentals video, we're going to be pretty basic, but then go into some of the other options. To start with and keep it simple, we're going to the strike attack bonus table and selecting moderate. We're going to give them the +7 to hit and then pop over to the strike damage table, first half anyway. And once again, we're going moderate and grabbing that 1d6 +2. We want them to be good in melee and ranged, so we can use a short sword and short bow as a description for the attacks, and what traits they should have, such as agile, etc. As for the range of our ranged attacks, 60 feet in line with the short bow is fine, especially with that damage. It's best to keep things simple with minions. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention something about our bandit here. There is an option we can do where we can give them a sneak attack. This would mean they deal an extra 1d6 precision damage if they hit an off-guard opponent. With an extra on average 3.5 damage, this would bump it up to high or even extreme damage for its level. So at this level, it's not super advisable for a minion. However, if you are considering it, dropping there to hit to +5 instead, in line with a low strike attack bonus, would make sense there. This would mean that they don't hit often, but when the conditions are right, they hit hard. That said, if you're making the bandit at a higher level, such as level 3 or 4, you can simply not increase the base damage and give them the sneak attack while keeping there to hit at moderate. The sneak attack taking the place of the higher damage. This is in line with advice given in the GM Core regarding strike damage. Before we close out our bandit, we should talk briefly about spellcasting. It's one of those topics that for enemy creatures is a little bit wrought, and people tend to waver on it a lot. My suggestion as always is to go back to what the purpose of the creature is and work backwards from there. If the purpose of the caster is buffing, then you don't need to really worry too much about spell DC or spell attack. But if they are meant to debuff or be more aggressive, then you'll have to consider it more. If magic isn't the creature's primary concern, then moderate is fine. High if they are supposed to be a caster, but also adjust their other stats accordingly, and extreme like most of the other numbers in the build guide should be left to the big bads. With that though, our bandit is done. If you really want, you can give them a short sword, short bow, and some leather armor in their inventory, but you don't super need to worry about it for a minion unless they're absolutely going to get looted. So if you have a loot goblin or a couple in your party, then load up the inventory. Now, this has been a long video and I really wish we could have covered a lot more ground. If you want me to do a video talking about monster making and diving further into unique abilities, let me know in the comments below. That said, the biggest suggestion I can give is to experiment. All the stats and rules are available for free on Archives and Nephis. So take the creature building rules, build some monsters, and compare them to some of the other creatures out there. I'll also say, without going into details about monster abilities, don't be afraid to steal from other creatures. Like a dragon's breath weapon is going to be fine on your fire-breathing cow so long as they're the same level. Anyway, I've talked for long enough, so I'd like to give a quick thank you to our supporters over on the Patreon. You help make all this possible and I super appreciate it. Also, I have a book out for Pathfinder 2nd edition called Blackpowder Magic and Plot. It's also available on Patreon, or you can get it on DriveThruRPG. Otherwise, be sure to follow me on all the socials. I'm on Blue Sky mostly, and I stream actual plays of Pathfinder 2nd edition multiple times a week to Twitch. Links for all of that is down below. If you like this video, you know what to do. Click like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. That said, I hope you have a good day, a good night, a good week, no matter where you are in the world. And remember, as always, we are the storytellers. Good night, everyone.